It was nearly 7:30 on a chilly spring morning in Seville when Lucia received the call. She was sitting at the breakfast table, trying to coax her 2-year-old son, Mateo, into eating a spoonful of warm porridge. The little boy, pale and sluggish, had been running a fever since the night before. Lucia hadn't slept more than an hour. The ringtone echoed sharply in the quiet kitchen, startling her. With one arm holding Mateo close, she reached for her phone and saw the caller ID, Hospital Universitario Virgen del Rocío. Her heart sank. "Buenos dias," she answered, her voice tight with nerves. "Señora Lucia Marín?" the nurse asked. "We're calling about your husband, Andrés." Lucia clutched the edge of the table. "Yes, I'm his wife. What's happened?" The nurse explained that Andrés had been brought in after collapsing at work. A suspected kidney stone, extremely painful, but not life-threatening. Lucia listened, nodding, though her thoughts were spinning. She thanked the nurse, hung up, and stared at the wall, frozen. Her husband needed her. But so did Mateo, who was now curled up against her chest, radiating heat. She couldn't bring him to the hospital in this state. After a few minutes of frantic pacing, she did what any daughter might do. She called her parents. "Papa, Mama, it's Andrés. He's in the hospital. I need to go to him, but Mateo's very ill. Please, could one of you come watch him for a few hours?" There was a pause. Then her mother's voice, calm but firm. "Lucia, we've got plans this morning. Pilates and then brunch with the Tardios. You know Saturdays are busy." Lucia blinked. "He has a fever of almost 40 degrees. I'm sorry, Carino. Maybe ask your neighbor." Lucia stared at the phone in disbelief. Her mother had once told her she'd die for Mateo, but apparently Pilates came first. She tried not to cry as she bundled Mateo in his blanket, murmuring apologies. She was taking him with her to the hospital. She had no choice. As she drove through the old cobbled streets towards the hospital, she kept glancing at the rear-view mirror. Mateo was asleep, cheeks flushed red. Guilt gnawed at her. He needed rest, not the sterile, chaotic air of an emergency ward. But her husband needed her too, and she was doing it all alone. Lucia stepped through the hospital doors, holding Mateo tightly against her chest. The cool, sterile air hit her at once, thick with the scent of antiseptic and anxiety. Mateo stirred but didn't wake. His fever had only worsened on the drive. His little body felt hot against her skin, like a coal smoldering in her arms. She approached the reception desk and gave her husband's name. After a few keystrokes, the nurse gestured down a hallway. "Room 307. He's stable now. You're the wife, yes?" Lucia nodded silently and made her way down the corridor. Each step felt heavy, her legs stiff from exhaustion and worry. When she finally pushed open the door, she found Andrés sitting upright on the hospital bed, scrolling through his phone, looking perfectly fine, irritated, even. "Andrés," she exhaled. He looked up, eyes widening at the sight of her. "You brought the baby?" he snapped. Lucia stepped in, gently closing the door. "I had no choice. My parents. You could have asked a neighbor. This isn't a place for a sick child." "I asked them," she replied, her voice tight. "They said they had brunch." Andrés scoffed. "Of course. And your sister?" "She's out of town." He shook his head in disbelief, as if she were the problem. "I'm the one in hospital, Lucia. I could have been dying." "You had a kidney stone," she replied, trying not to let her voice shake. "They said you were in pain, not dying. I still expected you here, without dragging our son into this mess." She said nothing. She didn't want to argue. Not in front of Mateo, not here. Instead, she pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down. Mateo whimpered softly, and she rocked him gently, whispering lullabies in his ear. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. Andrés dozed off after lunch. Lucia barely moved, afraid that any motion would make Mateo uncomfortable. He finally fell into a deeper sleep in her lap, and she let herself rest for just a moment. Then Andrés' phone buzzed. And buzzed again. Lucia tried not to look, but the screen lit up, and a name caught her eye. Clara S. Multiple messages.
Short.
Frequent. She looked at Andres, still asleep. The buzzing stopped. Then it started again. She knew she shouldn't, but her fingers moved before she could stop herself. She tapped the screen, and what she saw made her stomach twist. Messages full of hearts and late-night promises. One from just this morning. Did you tell her yet? Lucia felt her blood run cold. She sat frozen, the weight of Mateo in her lap suddenly feeling like a shield between her and the man she had loved for 7 years. There, in the dim light of room 307, Lucia realized something far worse than a hospital call had been waiting for her all along. Andres wasn't just hiding pain. He was hiding another life. Lucia didn't sleep that night. Not even a minute. Back home, after settling Mateo into his crib and watching his fever finally start to ease, she sat in the kitchen staring at her phone. Andres' messages still burned into her mind. Clara S. Her name appeared again and again, alongside flirty emojis, intimate jokes, and plans that made it clear this wasn't just some harmless distraction. This was betrayal. Lucia had never heard the name before. Clara wasn't a friend. She wasn't family. She wasn't someone from Andres' work, not that she knew of. But whoever she was, she had clearly been expecting him to tell Lucia something. Something that hadn't happened yet. Her hands trembled as she typed the name into social media. There were dozens of Claras, but only one Clara S. from Sevilla, with her profile wide open.
Blonde.
Perfect makeup. Smiling by the sea. Holding a champagne glass in one picture. In another, she stood beside a sleek, black Mercedes, the very model Andres had always said he wanted. Then Lucia froze. Clara had posted a photo just last week at a rooftop restaurant. And there, partially visible in the corner of the frame, was a man's hand resting on her thigh. That hand wore a wedding ring. Her stomach turned. Her world began to tilt, as if someone had moved the ground beneath her feet without warning. The kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence. Lucia's breath came shallow, like she'd been running. She thought of the nights Andres came home late, the business trips he never explained, the new cologne, the unexplained credit card charges. It had all been in front of her. She just hadn't wanted to see it. Lucia suddenly stood, her chair screeching across the tiles. She grabbed her coat, checked on Mateo once more, and left the house. Her feet took her down familiar streets. Past the panaderia, where they used to buy Sunday pastries. Past the square where he had proposed. Everything around her looked the same, yet none of it felt safe anymore. She ended up at her sister Alba's flat, where the hallway light buzzed softly above her as she knocked. Alba opened the door with surprise, eyes widening when she saw Lucia, pale and furious, standing at the threshold. "Lucia? What happened?" "I think Andres is having an affair," she whispered. Alba didn't ask questions. She pulled her sister into her arms and held her tightly. In that quiet embrace, Lucia felt something she hadn't in weeks. A sense that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone. The next morning, Lucia sat on Alba's worn velvet sofa, her hands wrapped around a mug of strong coffee that had long gone cold. Mateo was still asleep in the spare room, wrapped in one of Alba's old university blankets. The early sun filtered through the curtains, casting a dull glow over the room, but the light did little to chase away the fog of betrayal clouding Lucia's mind. Alba paced in front of her, arms crossed tightly. "I still can't believe it," she said. "Andres? With someone else? After everything you've done for him?" Lucia barely nodded. She felt hollow, like her soul had been scooped out and replaced with silence. "I need proof. Something more than messages and a cropped hand in a photo." Alba sat beside her. "You want to confront him?" Lucia nodded slowly. "But not without knowing everything. I want to know who she is, how long this has been going on, what he said about me behind my back." Alba didn't hesitate. "Then we'll find out." Within an hour, Alba had called in a favor from a friend she once dated, a local photographer who now worked part-time with a private investigator in Sevilla. By midday, Lucia was sitting in a cafe near the Guadalquivir River, nervously waiting to meet the man Alba trusted to help her uncover the truth. He arrived wearing a brown leather jacket and dark sunglasses. "Call me Rafa," he said, sliding into the seat across from her. Lucia told him everything about the messages, the woman's name, the strange behavior, the mounting distance between her and Andres. Rafa listened carefully, taking notes on a small pad. "I'll find her," he promised. "If she's been seen with your husband in public, there'll be a trail." Lucia thanked him, though it felt strange. Hiring someone like this. Secret meetings. Whispered truths. It wasn't who she was. But she wasn't sure who she was anymore. That evening, she returned home. Andres was already there. He looked up from his phone, startled to see her. "You didn't come home last night. I was at Alba's. Mateo had a fever. I needed help." He hesitated, then gave a stiff nod. "You should have told me. You should have told me a lot of things, Andres." He blinked. "What does that mean?" Lucia shook her head. "Nothing. Not yet." She walked past him without waiting for a reply. She could feel his eyes on her back as she climbed the stairs to Mateo's room. But for once, she didn't feel like the one left in the dark. The shadows were beginning to whisper their secrets, and Lucia was ready to listen. 2 days later, Lucia received a message from Rafa. "Got something? Meet me at La Perla Cafe, 4 p.m. Her hands trembled slightly as she read it. She glanced at the time. 2 hours to go. The longest 2 hours of her life. When she finally walked into La Perla, the cafe was quiet, the afternoon lull setting in. Rafa was already there, sitting in the back, nursing a cordido. He gestured for her to sit. "She's real," he said simply. "Her name is Paula Moreno. Lives in a flat in Santa Cruz. Works in advertising.
Divorced.
1 child. And yes, she's been seeing Andres." Lucia stared at him, lips parted. "How long?" "From what I can gather, at least 7 months." The words landed like stones. 7 months. That meant Andres had started cheating on her while Mateo was still in nappies. Rafa slid a small envelope across the table. Lucia hesitated, then opened it. Inside were photos, grainy, taken from a distance. Andres and Paula laughing as they walked down the street. Andres entering her building. Paula kissing him goodbye at her front door. Lucia's breath caught. It wasn't just infidelity. It was intimacy. Familiarity. He looked relaxed.
Happy. Free.
"How did they meet?" she whispered. "Through a client of hers. Andres handled the contracts for a design firm she works with." Things escalated quickly. Lucia's fingers tightened around the edge of the envelope. "Thank you, Rafa," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. That night, she lay in bed beside Andres, who had come home late, reeking faintly of cologne and excuses. She said nothing, just listened to the rhythm of his breathing. She imagined the lies he must have told Paula. Did he say Lucia was cold? Distant? A burden? Did he tell her about Mateo? Was she a secret, or was Paula? The next morning, she followed him. He said he had a meeting at the firm's downtown office. But Lucia, dressed in a dark coat and scarf, walked several paces behind him through the busy streets of Sevilla. When he turned left into a narrow alley, she paused at the corner, heart pounding. Moments later, Paula emerged from a florist shop. Andres smiled, took the bouquet from her, kissed her temple. Lucia's chest burned, but her eyes remained dry. She stepped back, slipping into the crowd, invisible. She didn't need to confront him. Not yet. Not until she knew exactly how to end this on her own terms. Lucia began to plan. She moved with quiet precision, like a woman walking a tightrope, measured, graceful, and deliberate. No breakdowns. No screaming matches. She smiled at neighbors, packed Mateo's lunch, attended Pilates, and kissed Andres goodbye at the door. But behind her eyes, a storm was forming. She opened a new bank account in her name only and slowly began transferring money from their joint savings, just a little at a time. Enough to go unnoticed. She sold an old necklace her mother had given her, one Andres never liked. She also returned to her old job at the gallery. The director, a soft-spoken man named Emilio, welcomed her with surprise and warmth. "I thought you'd given up on curating," he said. "I thought so too," she replied, then paused. "But I was wrong." With each passing day, Lucia grew bolder. She reconnected with old friends, women she had quietly let go of during the years of motherhood and marriage. Over coffee and wine, she listened to their laughter, their stories, and began telling her own. Not about Andres. Not yet. But about herself. "I forgot how much I loved being busy," she told one friend, Mariana, as they strolled past the Guadalquivir. "You didn't forget," Mariana said. "You were just too busy being someone else's version of useful." At home, she watched Andres. Studied him. The lies became easier to spot. The texts he sent with his phone angled away from her. The meetings that always ran long. The sudden interest in skincare. But Lucia no longer flinched. She felt like a woman holding a lantern, illuminating a dark room one shadow at a time. One afternoon, while Andres was out and Mateo was napping, she sat down at the kitchen table and wrote a letter. It wasn't to him. It was to herself. She listed the things she had given up. Her art. Her laughter. Her self-worth. And then, she listed the things she was taking back. Her independence. Her dignity. Her future. She folded the letter, slipped it into a box of photographs, and returned to tidying the house. Later that evening, Andres came home, humming a tune under his breath. "How was work?" she asked sweetly. "Same as usual," he replied, kissing her cheek. Lucia smiled.
So did she.
Because nothing was the same anymore. And she was done waiting for his honesty. She was building her escape, one quiet rebellion at a time. It started with a forgotten receipt. Lucia found it while clearing out the pockets of Andres's blazer before sending it to the dry cleaners. A dinner bill from a high-end restaurant in Cadiz. 2 meals, champagne, dessert. The date was the same evening he had claimed to be working late in Seville. She didn't confront him.
Not yet.
Instead, she folded the receipt neatly and placed it in her journal, right beside a photo of Mateo on his first birthday. 2 realities, pressed together like pages in a book, one innocent, one unforgivable. The next few weeks were a study in observation. Lucia watched him spin stories with the smooth confidence of a man who had never truly been questioned. She began tracking patterns, where he went, what he wore, how often he shaved. She noticed how his lies didn't trip him up. They were practiced.
Polished.
It made her wonder just how long he had been living like this. Then came the accident. He had returned home late, stammering something about a flat tire. Lucia noticed the faint scratch on his wrist, the scuff on his Italian shoes. He didn't smell like petrol or rubber. He smelled like perfume. Floral. Expensive. Not hers. The next morning, she followed him. She didn't tell anyone. Not even Mariana. She simply dressed quietly, left Mateo with her neighbor, and got into her car. She trailed him across the city, past the office building he supposedly worked in, and onto a quiet residential street near the edge of Triana. There, she watched him ring the doorbell of a modest white house with red shutters. A woman opened the door. She was younger, dark-haired, smiling. Andres stepped inside without hesitation. Lucia didn't cry. She didn't panic. She simply parked her car and waited. 2 hours passed. When he finally emerged, he looked relaxed.
Carefree.
She drove home in silence, her hands steady on the wheel. That evening, as they sat down for dinner, Andres joked about a colleague's birthday. Lucia listened with a serene smile. "You're quiet," he said between bites. "I've been thinking," she replied, setting down her fork, "about how people change, about the stories we tell ourselves." Andres chuckled. "That sounds heavy for a Tuesday." "Maybe," she said softly. "But sometimes, truth arrives on a very ordinary day." He looked at her then, eyes narrowing just slightly. She held his gaze. The mask had slipped just a little, and he sensed it. But Lucia? She had never been clearer. She was done pretending. Done playing house with a man who had mistaken her silence for weakness. The storm inside her was no longer brewing. It had arrived. Lucia began to plan with a calmness that surprised even her. She didn't rage. She didn't throw his clothes into the street or scream accusations across the dinner table. Instead, she documented. Quietly. Thoroughly. Every lie, every receipt, every glimpse of the double life Andres had so carefully curated. He was still oblivious. Still charming. Still tucking a kiss into her hair before heading off to meetings and dinners. Lucia smiled, nodded, and held Mateo a little tighter at night. She spoke to a solicitor, a kind woman named Carmen, who didn't flinch when Lucia handed her a folder marked Andres. Carmen looked through the contents with silent efficiency and offered a small, respectful nod at the end. "You have enough," she said simply. "More than enough." The next step would take time. But Lucia didn't mind. Time had become her ally. The only thing she hadn't prepared for was the phone call. It came one Friday evening as she bathed Mateo, the water still warm and fragrant with lavender soap. Her phone buzzed on the sink. Unknown number. She answered on instinct. "Is this Lucia?" A woman's voice, quiet and hesitant. "Yes." A pause. Then, "I think we need to talk. About Andres." Lucia's heart didn't race. "Not anymore." "Who is this?" "I'm sorry. My name is Clara."
I didn't know about you. Not really.
"I mean, he said you were separated." Lucia sank onto the bathroom stool. "You're the woman from the house." Clara gave a soft gasp. "You know." "I do." Another silence stretched across the line. "I didn't know there was a child," Clara whispered. "He never told me that." Of course he hadn't. Andres was careful like that. He could manipulate a story like a craftsman chiseling stone. Clara spoke again. "I left him 2 days ago. I couldn't. I found messages. From someone else." Lucia closed her eyes. Clara continued. "I thought you deserved to know. I thought maybe we both deserved better." Lucia's voice was steady. "Thank you. You did the right thing." When the call ended, she sat in silence, the soft splashing of Mateo playing in the tub grounding her. She reached for a towel and scooped him up, holding him close. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table and stared at a photograph of their wedding day. Andres smiling, sun-kissed, full of promise. She reached into the drawer and took out a lighter. But she didn't light it. Not yet. There would be a time for ashes. But not tonight. Tonight, she would write her own ending. With ink. With courage. And soon with fire. Lucia was ready. The days leading up to the confrontation were a blur. Each one felt like a carefully orchestrated prelude, where every detail was perfect, and yet her heart never seemed to calm. She had been living a double life, too, one where she played the role of the devoted wife, the mother who understood, the partner who waited, and another where she was sharpening her resolve, preparing for the truth to come crashing down. Andres, oblivious as ever, kept up the charade. He kissed her cheek before leaving for work, promised to be back for dinner, and mentioned the new project he was working on, something that required a lot of late nights. Lucia didn't answer. She simply watched him go. That evening, just as the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting the apartment in a soft golden glow, Lucia decided it was time. She took Mateo to her mother's house, citing a quick errand. Her mother, ever the doting grandmother, insisted she stay for dinner, but Lucia only gave a tight smile. There was no room for small talk today. The apartment was empty when she returned, just the faint smell of his cologne lingering in the air. She didn't waste any time. Lucia grabbed her phone, opening the file she'd painstakingly compiled. Messages, photos, receipts, timestamps. Every piece of evidence she needed. She dialed his number. Andres answered almost immediately. "Lucia, hey. Just wanted to." "Where are you?" she interrupted, her voice cool but resolute.
He paused.
"I'm out, just finishing up a meeting." "What's up?" Her voice didn't falter. "You're not coming back tonight. We're done."
What?
"Lucia, what are you talking about?" "Everything's fine."
No.
"Everything is not fine." She stepped toward the window, her reflection staring back at her. The woman she had been. the woman she was about to become. I know about Clara. And I know about the others. There was silence on the other end. A long, dreadful silence. Lucia, he said, his tone suddenly changing. I can explain. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, she said, her grip tightening on the phone. You've been lying to me, to Matteo, to everyone. And now it ends. I don't care about your explanations. Lucia, please, Andres begged, his voice strained. Let's talk about this. Don't do this. She could hear his panic, the fear in his voice. The man who had always controlled every situation suddenly felt powerless. But Lucia wasn't moved. She had already made her decision. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, she said coldly. And I don't need your lies anymore. We're done. There was a long pause, and then he finally spoke, quieter now. You'll regret this. Lucia didn't respond. She simply ended the call. It was over. She stood there for a moment, letting the weight of it sink in. No more lies. No more pretending. She was free. Andres would never understand the depth of her resolve. He had always underestimated her. But Lucia knew that she was stronger now than she had ever been. The woman who had once been lost in the shadows of his deceit had finally found her voice. And with that, she stepped into the light. The days following her confrontation with Andres felt surreal. Lucia moved through life like someone stepping out of a fog, her every action clear and deliberate. There was no more indecision, no more waiting for someone else's approval. The path ahead of her was her own to walk now. Her first step was securing her independence. She wasn't going to wait around for Andres to make his move or for things to resolve themselves. No more empty promises, no more chances. She gathered everything she had, bank statements, documents for her divorce filing, her own savings, and prepared for what would come next. But the most difficult part wasn't the paperwork. It wasn't the legal proceedings or even the emotional toll. It was Matteo. Every time she looked at him, her heart broke. He was so young, so innocent, and yet his world was about to be turned upside down. The idea of him growing up in two separate homes tore at her. But Lucia knew it was the right decision. They both deserved better than the life they had been living. She took him to the park one sunny afternoon, just the two of them, a rare moment of calm amidst the chaos. Matteo ran ahead, his little legs pumping with excitement, his laughter echoing in the air. Lucia smiled at him, her heart swelling with love. This was what she had been fighting for all along. Matteo, she said softly, crouching down to his level as he came back to her. I need to tell you something important. He stopped in his tracks, his wide brown eyes filled with curiosity. What, Mummy? She took a deep breath. Mummy and Daddy are going to live in separate homes. But that doesn't mean we won't be a family anymore. I'll always be here for you. Matteo's brow furrowed in confusion. But why, Mummy? You and Daddy always talk to me and play with me. Why can't we all stay together? Her heart broke again at his innocence. But she knew she had to explain, even if he didn't fully understand. Sometimes grown-ups don't get along, she said gently. It doesn't mean we don't love each other, but sometimes it's better to be apart. And this way, we can both be happy. You'll still see Daddy, and you'll always have Mummy. Matteo seemed to process it for a moment before nodding, his little face brightening once more. Okay, Mummy. I love you. I love you too, baby, she whispered, hugging him tight. That evening, Lucia went to her mother's house, her mind heavy with the weight of the decisions she had made. Her mother had always been a rock for her, and now, more than ever, she needed her strength. Lucia sat down across from her mother at the kitchen table, the same table they had sat at countless times when Lucia was a child. Mom, I'm scared, Lucia admitted, her voice trembling despite herself. I'm scared of how everything will change. I'm scared for Matteo. But most of all, I'm scared of being alone. Her mother reached across the table, taking her hand in hers. Lucia, you're not alone. You've never been alone. You have your family, your friends, and you have yourself. And that's more than enough. Lucia squeezed her mother's hand, feeling the comfort of her words wash over her. She wasn't alone. She had built a life that was now hers to reclaim. "I'll be okay, won't I?" Lucia asked, more to herself than to her mother. "You will be," her mother replied, her voice firm with conviction. "You've always been strong, my dear. And this is just the beginning of your new journey." Lucia nodded, a quiet strength settling within her. She had been through the storm, and now the sun was rising on a new day. It wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. And as she held her son close that night, her heart full of hope for the future, Lucia knew one thing for sure. The best was yet to come.